Hello everyone, I'm Joe Herl. If you don't have a copy yet of our handout, go ahead and download that from whatever site they tell you to download it from. Welcome to attendees of the Hymn Society Conference. Hymn Society members all know what a hymnal companion is. It tells the stories behind the hymns in a particular hymnal and gives biographies of their authors and composers. Every major hymnal has one, and sometimes minor ones and hymnal supplements too. The trouble with most companions is that it is difficult to know whether the information in them is accurate. Often, sources are not cited, so it isn't clear where the information comes from. In fact, companions often take it from previous companions, which copy from previous companions, and so on, with much of the material going back to a handful of 19th century sources or to John Julian's monumental Dictionary of Hymnology, whose last edition appeared in 1907. So with older hymns, modern companions may have missed the past century of research. After the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod published its Lutheran Service Book in 2006, work on its companion began in earnest in 2008. We had to decide whether to write our companion quickly so our people would have it in their hands right away, or to take our time and produce something that would stand the test of time. In the end, we decided to start from scratch and consult primary sources for every text, translation, tune, and setting or harmonization in the hymnal. Of course, we did not ignore secondary sources, but we sought out the best and most recent research. We were also determined to cite all significant sources so other scholars could easily check whether we had it right. In the end, we examined 2,813 texts, translations, tunes, and settings from 1,527 unique primary sources, plus a large number of secondary sources. As a result, we decided that of the attributions given in the printed hymnal, 564 were not correct. That's an average of nearly one per hymn. No, we're not going to change them all in the printed hymnal. That would create mass confusion. Although since hymns were traditionally sung in the office rather than in the mass, then I suppose it would create more office confusion. Yeah, okay. In any case, 564 changes to attributions is a lot. We'll break that number down in a little bit. For now, let me point out that it does not include every new bit of information we uncovered about a hymn. For example, other companions report that the hymn Lift Every Voice and Sing was first published in 1921. Well, we found a published source from more than 20 years earlier, from 1900, the year the hymn was written. But this is not one of the 564 changed attributions because the attribution hasn't changed. The hymn was still written and composed by the brothers James Weldon and Rosamond Johnson. Discovery of the earlier sources did not change that. How many discoveries of this sort did we make that aren't represented in the number of changed attributions? We have no idea. Early in the project, they were coming fast and furious, and we didn't even try to count them. Peter, you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Joe. Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Reske, and I'm going to give an overview of the book. And so I think the first place we should start is by taking a look at the book, the 2 volumes. As you can see, it's quite substantial. And so let's dig into these 2 volumes with slipcase. And let's start with the essay on that most Lutheran of hymns. A mighty fortress is our God. You'll see right at the top, the text background section gives historical information about the text, with an account of how it began life as a hymn of comfort, but much later became a polemical hymn, the battle hymn of the Reformation. This section does not give the date and place of publication. We'll talk about that in a moment. Next, we have the text commentary, which interprets the text for use in Christian devotion. Early sources call the hymn a versification of Psalm 46, but in fact, only verse 1 of the psalm, and we can see it here, only verse 1 of the psalm is so treated. Then the hymn goes its own way. The commentary explains why the hymn can still be considered a version of Psalm 46. It also considers why Luther chose the word fortress, in German Burg, to translate the Hebrew word machaseh and Latin refugium, rather than the more abstract Zuversicht, meaning confidence, which Luther chose for his Bible translation. As we continue through here, we can see the first 2 lines of stanza 4. The word they still shall let remain, nor any thanks have for it, are obscure in English and are widely misinterpreted even in German. This is because Luther used an idiom that had fallen out of use by the 19th century. The text commentary here explains this and gives Luther's intended meaning. Text commentary continues and is followed by a section on the tune. Among other things, this section explains how Luther's syncopated non-metrical tune gradually became the stodgy tune in common meter that most churches sing today. Following that is a section on the hymn's liturgical use. We'll flip ahead to that. Then a performance note about an issue that organists face when playing the hymn. After this, the author of the essay is identified. Altogether, 127 authors contributed to the book. Then comes a section that distinguishes our companion from every other companion in English, a historical summary with precisely defined categories of information, starting with the text category. This category is Continental Europe, the Reformation era, 1524 to 1554. But there are lots more. Take a look at this. Here's the index of texts and tunes by historical category. And you can get a feel for it here. Exactly how we placed hymns into categories is explained in the preface, including what we did when a hymn fit more than one category. Systematizing this information allowed us to produce some useful charts, such as this one. Historical categories of text in LSB. Now, going back to the historical summary. The next category is confession, in this case, Lutheran. That's how we classify early Lutherans. Later on, we get more detailed. For example, we differentiate between pietist and non-pietist Lutherans, and still later we indicate specific Lutheran bodies, such as the United Lutheran Church in America or the Ethiopian Evangelical Church Mekane Jesus. Anglican hymns are treated similarly. We have 10 distinct subcategories under the Church of England. Here is our index of texts by religious confession. And you can see here the Church of England breakdown. And then on the next page, part of the Lutheran breakdown, just for example. Oh, incidentally, these indexes and charts are in the back of volume 2. Again, back to the historical summary. We also give the hymn's place of origin, Germany, and its original first line, here in German, plus the first line in Spanish, since a Spanish translation appears in LSB. Its author is Martin Luther. The authorship of some hymns is not certain, and so we have various qualifying terms which are precisely defined in the preface. Probably by, possibly by, attributed to, and unidentified. We can further see that this hymn is based on the model Psalm 46. Other hymns and even secular texts may also occur as models. We then give the earliest source of the text, followed by other important sources. In this case, no copies of the first two sources are known. A note to the first source explains the chronological order of publication and why we believe the hymn was in this book. Since we could consult source 3, which we see here, there is additional information, including the heading, its first line in the source, the number of stanzas, and comments. After this come references to editions of the text and commentaries on it, such as other companions. Sometimes we found literal prose translations of a text into English, in which case we cite them as well, because they're useful to translators and to others who want to understand hymn texts better. Similar information is given for the translation, except that here we also note any textual differences between the cited source and Lutheran Service Book. So for example, you see here 1.5, this is stanza 1, line 5. In this source from 1868, it read the old bitter foe, and by LSB, it reads the old evil foe, and the highlighted word evil shows us that that was the change in that line. One thing to mention is that this doesn't necessarily mean that the editors of LSB made these changes, but that through time, from this source, by the time it got to LSB, these were the changes. And if there are interesting things about that, we explain it. There aren't too many here, just a handful, whatever it is, 8, 10 changes. But sometimes there are a lot more. Check this out. Here are the list of changes for By All Your Saints in Warfare. Starting here, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and I'll just keep scrolling.
And scrolling.
And scrolling. This goes on for 4 pages. All right, back in the historical summary, we then come to the tune. The tune is treated in a similar fashion, except that we also explain the derivation of the tune name, a very popular bit of information. In this case, first line of text in German, not very exciting. and we indicate the origin of the tune. Classifying the origin of the tune allowed us to produce this index, the index of tunes by original genre. You can take a look there. And this index allowed us to produce charts. Oh yeah, here the index goes on. It allowed us to produce charts such as this one, the musical origins of tunes in LSB. Probably not a surprise, but we can say statistically that the vast majority of the tunes in LSB come from hymns, then folk songs, polyphony, etc. And it also allowed us to produce in this index, which is one of my favorites, the index, or the chart rather, the chart of sacred and secular origins of tunes in LSB. 92% of the tunes in LSB come from sacred origins. Going back to the historical summary, we then include information on the musical setting or harmonization. This is where many companions fall short. You look for this information, it isn't there. And you're left to wonder whether the companion's author didn't know it or just didn't include it. Here, the section on the arranger is always present. And if we don't know who it is, we admit it, as we do here. All right, let's look at another index. Here's the index of Textin tunes by date of dissemination. You can get a taste of it. Now, what does that mean, the date of dissemination? It's the date when a text or tune first became publicly known. With most hymns, since the advent of printing, this is the year of publication, but that doesn't make sense for medieval texts or for tunes that were transmitted orally long before they were written down. So we define this date carefully to include all possibilities. Keep scrolling here, you can take a look at another page. With some hymns, in order to identify the earliest source, we had to track down the precise date of publication. For recent hymns, this often meant asking publishers to check their inventory records so we could get down to the month, week, even day that something entered their inventory. With older hymns, it meant checking contemporary records, such as copyright entries, publishers' advertisements, and journal reviews. We did the same for sources published with no imprint date. An example is the Hymnal Noted, a very important 19th century source of translations from Latin. It was edited by John Mason Neal and Thomas Helmore. Several editions of it appeared, most of them undated. Julian's Dictionary of Hymnology gives the dates, but unusually for Julian, they are wrong. We determine the correct dates by checking the publisher's advertisements in the Musical Times. Now notice in this index, the superscripts after some of the hymn numbers, like right here. Many of the text indexes list individual stanzas rather than entire hymns. For example, hymns from the Middle Ages often have a concluding Trinitarian stanza that dates from a later period, so that stanza is treated separately in the historical summaries and listed separately in this index. Here is another index, the index of individuals by date of birth and death. Do you celebrate anniversaries of hymn writers? This index marks such anniversaries by year and also by month and day. All right, now, my favorite index. This is the index of sources by title, which, by the way, runs to 38 pages. This index runs to 38 pages. The index is divided into 5 sections: biblical sources, historical genres and periods, manuscripts and unpublished typescripts, printed sources and published typescripts, and recordings. Yes, in some cases, the earliest source was a phonograph record or a compact disc. Let's look at one example. Here, Davids Harpfenspiel, we can see that it is from 1745. It's number 1745-13 in the bibliography of Das Deutsche Kirchenlied, a recent critical edition of German hymns. And you can see that we use the exemplar from the British Library. Altogether, we obtained sources from 308 different libraries. You'll see that the hymn number is in bold, meaning that this is the earliest source of that hymn. We have copies of all the sources we used, except for a handful whose only known exemplar is bound too tightly to be photographed. And as soon as we get the sources better organized, we'll deliver them, along with all our research notes, to the Concordia Historical Institute in St. Louis, so other scholars can use them too. One more interesting feature of the companion is the list of performance suggestions for each hymn. Here's a page of that. You'll see the column labeled PS. That stands for part singing. Using a number from 0 to 3, it indicates whether a harmonization is designed to be sung in parts and how easily a congregation or choir could manage it. The next 4 columns give suggested tempos from 4 sources: our companion, the accompaniment edition of the hymnal 1982, the Missouri Synod's Service Playing Resource Book from 1999, and the 2007 Musician's Guide to Evangelical Lutheran Worship. On the far right, the comments column includes any tempos given in early sources, especially if they originated with the composer. For living composers, we contacted them to ask their preferred tempos. This column also gives brief performance notes. For longer notes, the reader is referred back to the performance section of the hymn essay. So in addition to the indexes, Volume 2 contains the 680 biographies prepared for everyone who was identified in the historical summaries as authors, translators, composers, and arrangers. And because the biographies are not included in line with the hymns, the way some companions do, they're just arranged all together alphabetically. And here we can see Percy Dearmer. After the full biography, we give a summary of that person's contributions to the hymnal. Here we see Dearmer's translation contributions, including specific stanzas. So you'll see the breakdown right here at 489 for Hail Thee Festival Day. Contributions may include text model, text, translation model, translation, tune model, tune, and setting. Unlike many other companions, ours provides a list of commentaries, usually other companions, much like we did in the historical summaries for the hymns. And we also include references, another feature not typically found in the biographies of other companions. These references, by the way, are a combination of 1, important sources consulted for the preparation of the biography, and 2, select sources useful for further reading. Finally, and this is a fun feature, we cross-reference names that have biographies elsewhere in the book. It helps in navigating the book, but also highlights familial and professional relationships, such as Percy Dearmer and here, Ralph Vaughan Williams. The companion also contains 17 longer historical and topical essays. You can see the list here. I'll give you a second to look at that. The essay on hymns since 1960 has, this is really cool, a pronunciation guide to the names of all Lutheran authors and composers active since that date. And the essay on singing hymns at home and school includes a list of core hymns classified for each grade in school. All right, Joe, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Peter. I mentioned earlier that we changed 564 attributions given in the printed hymnal. That's a lot, but many of them really aren't all that significant. 111 are due to our simply tracking down authors or translators of individual stanzas, as opposed to the entire hymn. Of course, even that occasionally yielded some surprising results. For example, the translation of Paul Gerhardt's Ich singe dir mit Herz und Mund, beginning "Rejoice, my heart, be glad and sing," is credited in the hymnal to the 19th century English translator John Kelly. But in various books over the years, one stanza and then another was replaced. Until today, nothing of Kelly's original remains. A further 126 changes in attributions were to anonymous hymns where we discovered an earlier source than previously reported, or conversely, we discovered that a hymn was not in a previously reported source. 109 attribution changes were for harmonizations, where previously only a source had been named, but we identified the individual responsible, or vice versa. It's nice that we could correct these errors, of course, but we wouldn't consider most of these changes particularly significant. More significant are the 20 cases where we identified a different author or composer than the one previously named, or the 25 cases, excluding harmonizations, where only a source had been identified, but we were able to name an individual, or the 30 instances where the reverse was true. We removed an attribution to an individual and assigned it to a source instead. In 55 cases, we found a source for a hymn that had previously been identified only by a historical or geographical category, such as German, 17th century. There are other sorts of changes we made than the ones I described, but their numbers are few and it would take too long to describe them here. The number of changed attributions is not the only measure of a companion's scholarship. As I mentioned earlier in connection with Lift Every Voice and Sing, sometimes we made discoveries that did not lead to changed attributions. One of them concerns the origin of the Welsh tune Cumronda, which commonly sets "Guide me, O thou great Redeemer," or the earlier form Great Jehovah. Apparently, the tune's composer, John Hughes, was earning so much from occasional printings of the tune that he did not allow it to be put into a permanent collection because it would earn less. Meanwhile, two variants of the tune developed, one used in Britain and the other used in America. So, bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. That's the American version. The British version is, feed me till I want no more. They really aren't all that different though, because the American version uses the British tenor part as the tune and vice versa. Which was the original? Well, Bernard Massey addressed this question twice in 2000 in the Bulletin of the Hymn Society of Great Britain and Ireland. And John Rees did so in 2010. The president of the Welsh Hymn Society, Rhidian Griffiths, also did quite a bit of work on the problem, but no one could be certain of the answer because no copy of the hymn festival program from 1907, when the hymn was first sung, could be found. Thus matters stood until 2013, when I chanced upon the website of the Pontypridd Museum and saw a photograph of a program for a Gymanfa or hymn festival, held at Capel Ronda on Sunday, November 1st, 1907. Might this have been the original source of the hymn? The museum's curator, Brian Davis, tracked the original program down for me. It was in the possession of a woman whose grandmother had attended the 1907 hymn festival and had saved the program. So now we know the answer. Let's look at the page with the tune. Okay, can we see the relevant part? I'm not sure on my screen. Okay, yeah, right there, the second last line from the bottom, you see the top system, the soprano part, so. The tenor part is so, fa, mi, re, do, so. So it's the British form that's the original. Sorry, Americans. Incidentally, the date on the program, Sul Tachwedd Cyntaf, a Sunday, November 1st, is wrong. In 1907, November 1st was on a Friday, not a Sunday. I asked Mr. Davis about that, and he checked local newspapers and discovered a notice placing the festival on Sunday, November 17th, 1907. The date on the program itself appears to have been a printer's error. Some hymns had multiple changes and attributions. The story of How Great Thou Art is well known to hymn scholars. Written in Swedish, it was translated into German, from German into Russian, and from Russian into English. Except that it wasn't. The Russian version actually appeared before the German version, and the German version did not contribute to the English one. The English version is not, by the way, simply a translation by Stuart Hine from the Russian. The first English stanza translates the first Russian and Swedish stanza, with a couple of lines taken from stanza 3 of the original. But stanza 2 in English summarizes stanzas 2 through 4 of the original, and the last 2 English stanzas are new texts by Hine. There is now a small possibility, by the way, that the Russian version was translated from English and not the other way around. The book in which it appeared, Kimvali by Ivan Prokhanov of 1908, was billed by its author as a book of translations from English. He was fluent in that language, in English, and wrote his memoirs for an American audience. The problem with that idea, though, is that although the Swedish hymn had been published in Chicago 2 decades earlier, in 1890, we have not located an English translation that appeared before Prokhanov's book. So we are still going to consider the English translation to have come from the Russian. for now. That could change, we'll see. Have I said anything about this hymn's tune? The prevailing wisdom is that it was originally in triple meter and did not appear in its current form until later. In fact, we found a source from 1894 in which the tune is in duple meter and is nearly identical to the modern form, except for a single difference in pitch and a different rhythm in the penultimate measure. Let's see. Where is the difference in pitch? Do we have it?
I don't remember which measure it was in.
Go down a bit, please.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it evidently isn't that different, but the rhythm in the second last measure is slightly different from what we have now. The modern harmonization relies quite a bit on this setting, but it's different enough that we credit a later source. Missionary J. Edwin Orr heard the arrangement sung by a Naga tribesman in the state of Assam in India, and later wrote that the harmonization had been sung by a Naga choir and transcribed by a Mennonite missionary. And so we credit the setting to members of an unidentified Naga choir from the state of Assam in India. All right, then there's the song Alabaré a mi Señor. This was a bear. It took 4 of our authors many hours to trace its history. It did not originate with the 2 men to whom it is commonly credited, the Spaniards Manuel José Alonso and José Pagan. In fact, Alonso, a Spanish priest, picked it up when he was resident at St. Peter's Church in Yonkers, New York. It was actually Robert Savage, a Baptist missionary at the Christian radio station HCJB in Quito, Ecuador, who learned it during a trip to Puerto Rico in the late 1940s or early 1950s. The song was frequently requested on HCJB's daily morning program, and Savage published it in 1953. Interestingly, the music of Alabaré is not stylistically native to the Caribbean, but is more characteristic of the corrido, a narrative ballad associated with the Mexican Revolution of 1910. One of our authors advances the possibility, though there's no direct evidence, that Pentecostal missionaries from Los Angeles, where Pentecostalism had grown rapidly in the early 20th century, came into contact with Alabaré in California and carried it to Puerto Rico. One entire genre of tunes gave us quite a bit of trouble: the so-called Neo-Gallican tunes. These are modern tunes written in 17th and 18th century France, but printed on a 4-line staff as though they were Gregorian chant. Examples include Deus tuorum militum, A Christe sanctorum, Adoro te devote, O quanta qualia, and Iste confessor, with Grafton, a later example, and Adeste Fideles, an example from outside France. Here are 2 stanzas of Adoro te devote from its earliest source. On the right, you can see the familiar tune. Vitus tactus custus in te fallitur, and so on. The question is how to interpret the rhythm. In this case, the longa, the note with a longer stem appears to indicate a longer note, yielding a modern version in a neat triple meter. Adoro te supplex latens deitas. For some reason in this source, the first stanza, the music of the first stanza is slightly different in the first line from the other stanzas. So you can see that up on the left here. We transcribed the first stanza on the next page, but the other stanzas are closer to what we sing today. So in some other tunes, though, such as Iste Confessor, Iste Confessor Domini Sacratus, interpreting in tunes like this, interpreting the rhythm this way does not produce anything metrical. Interestingly, the result is exactly the opposite of what appears in modern hymnals, including LSB, where Iste Confessor is strongly metrical. Di, 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 di. And Adoro te devote is unmeasured. Thee we adore, O hidden Savior, thee. The scholarship on Neo-Gallican tunes, by the way, is practically non-existent. This would be a great dissertation topic for someone conversant in French. The only full study is in English. It's Cyril Pockney's book, The French Diocesan Tunes and Their Melodies. It's from 1954, and that is far from scholarly. Most annoyingly, the author does not give the actual titles of the primary sources, but only general descriptions such as Paris Processional 1697 and Grenoble Antiphonor 1753. Virtually every recent hymnal companion simply repeats these pseudo titles for the sources, but they're not correct. But the correct ones are not always easy to determine. How in the world do you find the Grenoble Antiphonor in a library catalog when its real title is Epitome Antiphonari Romani Silvestrale? Peter and I went page by page through quite a few Neo-Gallican books, including all those at the University of York, where the principal collection that Pockney used is now housed, the University of Cambridge, including the college libraries, the British Library, and the relevant sources in Gallica, the French national collection of digitized early books. We also checked through correspondence, books at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the Bibliothèque Saint-Geneviève in Paris, and the Bibliothèque de la Sorbonne. And after all of that, we definitely had some Sorbonnes, yes.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Back to you.
With the biographies, like the hymn essays, we wanted our information to be precise, reliable, and well documented. So at a minimum, we set out to verify basic biographical facts. For example, place and date of birth, place and date of death. To do this, we relied on census records, birth records, baptism records, death records, and obituaries, and many other kinds of sources. One case where we relied on death records to determine a birth year is that of Anna Bartlett Warner, author of Jesus Loves Me. Warner's birth year is not certain. The year 1827 is frequently cited, but this is problematic. We know that Anna's mother, Anna Marsh Warner, née Bartlett, died within 2 years of Anna's birth. However, The mother died January 25th, 1826, so it is impossible for the daughter to have been born in 1827. Anna herself wrote a biography of her sister Susan. A careful reading of that book, which includes transcriptions of letters, makes it clear that Susan was born in 1819 and Anna was most likely born in 1824. Supporting this, census records generally list Susan and Anna being about 5 years apart in age. Perhaps complicating matters, the Warners' first child, who died as an infant in January 1819, was also named Anna Bartlett. Anna Warner's birth year is probably 1824, but the month and day of Anna's birth, August 31st, are not in question. In the same biography of her sister, she quotes a letter of Susan dated September 1st that says, "Yesterday was Anna's birthday, and a happy one it was." In another instance, we had little more than a name. The translator of Christ Mighty Savior, Light of All Creation, is Alan G. McDougall. But who was he? We knew that he had changed his name at some point in his life to Alan Samuel Boots Glover. And by the way, changing your name is playing a dirty trick on biographers. An obituary in a trade journal for the publishing industry mentioned an A.S.B. Glover, former editor at Penguin Books, who had translated some Latin hymns as a young man. This was the key. Several histories of Penguin provided many of the fascinating details about this remarkable man. He was born in London in 1895 and was imprisoned as an absolutist conscientious objector during World War I. His collection of Latin hymn translations came out while he was in prison. He worked for a time for a circus, and he had tattoos from head to foot, except for his left hand. Later in life, he bore the scars on his face from their removal and wore a fingerless glove on his right hand. Glover, described as having a nearly perfect memory and vast knowledge of countless subjects, worked for a series of publishers doing various editorial tasks, including anglicizing spellings for the British version of Reader's Digest. He was ultimately hired at Penguin after the head of the firm grew tired of receiving from Glover lists of corrections to already published books. A final example is the author of the lovely hymn, Before the Throne of God Above. John Julian provides reliable information on the first part of the life of Charity L. Bancroft, née Smith. He even tells us in his supplement that her first husband died, and she is, by a second marriage, now Charity DeChenez. Or did he mean DeCheney? Subsequent research had cast some doubt on the spelling of her last name. Is it Chnez or Chney? Well, we found an obituary and, better still, a newspaper article about her in the May 30th, 1915 issue of the San Francisco Chronicle. After the death of her first husband, she moved from Ireland to California, where she married Frank DeCheney, with a Y, who was 25 years her junior. So I like to imagine that John Julian made contact with her when preparing his supplement, and he received a written reply. In handwriting, a lowercase y looks a lot like a lowercase z. And, perhaps he just read the wrong letter. Either way, we are certain that her last name was DeCheney. The newspaper article gave the details of their divorce, an event that made front page news in 1915. The article described her as a former social leader of San Mateo, and for many years prominent in prison reform work in California. She moved away from Frank, in the words of the article, because the temptations in his path made her life unhappy. Indeed, Frank DeChaney said, "She was strongly religious, while I am an agnostic, and that was the principal reason why we could not live happily together." The other complication with this biography was that her collection of hymn texts, reported by Julian, could be found in no library or online catalog. It was another spelling mistake. Julian spelled the title of her collection within the veil, V-E-I-L, while the actual title was spelled V-A-I-L. Both are acceptable spellings of the word, but because of this mistake, her collection was hidden from hymnologists for more than a century. But now, we know not only who she was and what her life was about, we have 25 more of her hymns.
You know, Peter, talking about Julian and him possibly receiving a letter from Charity DeChaney. You know, we were actually over in the British Library using Julian's manuscript notes and correspondence. Did we ever look that up? I don't remember.
No, we didn't. We came
didn't.
across this information too late.
Oh dear, that's too bad.
But it is fun to imagine.
Yeah. Well, if anyone's listening to us from Britain, well, you've got your assignment now. That's great. Okay, we have lots more stories we could tell if we had the time. In fact, sometimes I think that our book is nothing much more than a great collection of anecdotes. But often our contribution wasn't so much making a new discovery as piecing together existing information from all sorts of obscure places to tell the story behind a hymn. I would never have guessed, as Bennett Zahn has argued, that "O Come All Ye Faithful" may contain a coded message calling for the restoration of the Stuart monarchy to the British throne. Or that Beautiful Savior, also called Fairest Lord Jesus, was originally a Catholic meditation on the Blessed Sacrament, not to mention that the hymn may have inspired the writing of the German national anthem, as Jörn Kierkegaard suggests. Or that George Petrie, an Irish civil servant who moonlighted as one of the finest Irish watercolor painters of his era, discovered both the text and the tune of "I Bind Unto Myself Today." But it never occurred to him to put them together. That didn't happen until after his death, when Ralph Vaughan Williams matched them in the English hymnal of 1906. So lots of stories we could tell, but we'd be here all day. I hope this gives you an idea of the effort we put in to make sure our book is as accurate and as complete as possible. I don't know that I have a good conclusion to this presentation. Peter, do you want to say anything before we get into questions?
Yeah, so, well, we started in 2008. Maybe I'll change the view here so we can see both of us.
Oh, you know what? And this is probably a good opportunity to mention our third co-author too, John Vicar.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because at the very beginning in 2008, it was you and John.
At the very beginning.
Right.
Yeah,
and in
so
2010, John took another position. And so he had to leave this project, and that's when I came on board.
Yeah, and yeah, starting in 2010, his role was diminished, but Joe came on board, and but John did read read all of it. And yeah,
Did
it was,
after it was done.
that's right. Yeah. Anyway, it took 11 years, and very often people would ask, when is it coming? When is it coming? And I would try to describe some of the things that that we showed here today. But it really wasn't until December, just this past December when it came out, that I think people finally understood the lengths and the depths that we went to on this companion. And of course, there's tons of Lutheran stuff in here because it's the companion to Lutheran Service Book. But we put in just as much effort on all of the hymns represented there. So the broader hymns that you'll find in most hymnals, we worked really hard on all of those as well. And I'm confident that people from any background, whatever their interest in hymns, will find something really valuable, edifying, interesting, even funny in these 2,600 pages.
You were really you were really on the hot spot more than I was, because you're not only the editor of the companion, you're also the publisher.
Yes, it's a unique position.
That was fun. Okay, we've got some questions that we've assembled. Since you don't have a chance to ask them, you folks watching out there, we thought we would assemble some in advance. So, Peter, do you have a question?
Yeah, we can start with, well, we were kind of talking about it. What kind of staff did we have, or how did we fund this project? I mean, if it took 11 years, how did this work?
Oh, yeah, how did we fund it? Peter, do you have an answer?
Sure. As Joe alluded, all three of the editors, Joe, John, and I, have full-time jobs doing other things. So largely we're working on the companion in our spare time, definitely for Joe and John. Now, granted, because I'm the editor at the publisher, the last 18 months or 2 years or so, it became a huge part of my daily work. But that was a big part of it. We should mention the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, our church body, provided some funds to allow us to purchase sources, as did the Hymn Society's McElrath SQ Research Fund. And Joe, what about the Schwann Foundation?
The Marvin M. Schwann Charitable Foundation allowed me to take a semester's leave of absence from my university position when I started working on the project in 2011. And I also had 3 undergraduate research assistants serving for 1 year each. This was amazing because they got paid student wages and did some incredible work.
Yeah, they really did.
Yeah, Christopher Allman, who actually ended up serving another semester after he graduated from here and went on and did his doctorate. And then Sarah Schultz, now Sarah Fields, and Laura Hedstrom was the most recent one. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add, there were a lot of volunteers, many members of the Hymn Society doing things like checking sources at libraries we couldn't visit in person. And untold number of librarians all around the world were just so eager to answer queries.
Librarians are my favorite people. They are absolutely amazing, and it was really interesting seeing so many of them get so excited and into this project. A number of hymn scholars from all around the world, members of the IAHA, the International Hymn Society, gave us their expertise. We had a number of people in this country too, Hymn Society members, who helped out by looking things up for us at various libraries where they're resident or traveled to. We should also mention a couple of people like Chris Fenner, of
Yeah.
Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, generously shared his research into primary sources of hymns. And Dick Watson, the editor of the Canterbury Dictionary of Hymnology, gave us access to drafts of the dictionary before it was published in 2013.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of help from all over, and it was great. It was fun getting to know a lot of people.
Yeah, it really was. All right, I have another question.
You do?
Yeah,
Oh,
and this is one I've been asked a handful of times already in the 6 months or so the book has come out. Previous Missouri Synod hymnal companions, published by Concordia
oh
Publishing
yeah,
House.
I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, so previous companions from CPH have contained the full texts of hymns in their original languages. You know, so like all of the German stanzas. Why didn't we do that?
Oh dear. Well, for one thing, space was a consideration. The companion already has, what, over 2,600 pages?
Yeah.
How many more would we need to print all 29 stanzas of Thomas Kingo's hymn On My Heart and Print Your Image? I mean, LSB uses what, one stanza of that?
One stanza.
Yeah. I mean, for that matter, do we really want to print the 3,000 lines of Bernard of Cluny's Hora Novissima, the source of Jerusalem the Golden? So space was a concern. Also, to do it properly, we would have had to obtain permission from each of the many libraries supplying sources for the project, even for sources in the public domain, because some libraries, especially in Europe, require permission to publish excerpts from any item in their collections. And that would have been, well, the book would never have come out if we'd had.
Yeah, and we really did rely on many European libraries.
Yeah, we did. Also, because more and more primary sources are becoming available on the internet, often without cost, we decided instead just to point readers to the most useful digital repositories of these sources. There's a list of those in the index of sources by type.
Yep, that's my favorite index.
I really like it too, yeah. And then we also pointed out places, as we mentioned in the presentation, where literal prose translations into English are available. One of these is the companion we did for our own Hymnal Supplement 98, which has literal versions in English of every hymn originally in a foreign language. We didn't leave our readers completely in the lurch. We directed our authors, the essay authors, to include in their essays any stanzas missing from the hymnal that they thought were important or interesting. And as you presented, we also listed all the differences between the earliest English forms of the text and what's in LSB.
Yeah. Well, so it makes me think of another question. You said something about how digital sources are available now. I mean, how did that change? How did that change our research?
When we started out, digitization of these sources was still in its infancy. And so we ended up making a lot of interlibrary loan requests. We made, I would guess, close to 1,000 interlibrary loan requests for sources. But as we went on, it's amazing how many times we could check whether a tune or text was in the book or check the precise form of it just with a few clicks and looking at a major digitized repository. And the great thing is some of these sources, things like early English books online, 18th century collections online, the British Library's newspaper archive, those sources actually have full text searching capabilities.
Mhm.
And so all we had to do was plug in a line from a hymn stanza to see where an original source might be. And, we found a number of early sources that way. For example, Away in a Manger, which
Yeah.
everybody thought was from a Lutheran source. They knew it wasn't really by Luther, but everybody figured it was from an American Lutheran source. In fact, we discovered through one of those full text searches that the earliest source was actually a Universalist magazine published by a whose editor was a firm advocate of the temperance movement. And the fact that it was in a Universalist magazine probably accounts for the hymn's lack of theology. Okay. Anyway, what was I saying? Anything intelligent? Do you have anything to add about that question while I get my thoughts together?
Sure. I found that a lot of sources that may have not been available, let's say before the fall of the Berlin Wall, like in former Soviet bloc countries, are now becoming available, and not just available, that their sources are being digitized, their catalogs are being digitized, and it's opening up some sources that, at least in the West, we thought were gone.
Right.
I don't remember specifics, but something like the last known copy of a hymnal was thought to have been destroyed during World War II in a German library that had been bombed or something. But it turns out, no, there was maybe one in Poland still, or something like that. There were just amazing surprises.
Yeah. I remember one source, I can't remember which one it was, but it had been reported in the literature as being lost. And I had the title in front of me, and I was looking in a German library catalog, and lo and behold, there it was, sitting on the shelf in the catalog. And that discovery was reported in an article a couple of years ago in the Jahrbuch für Liturgik und Hymnologie, along with the discovery of two other German sources. Recent books are, there was another early source that was discovered just a couple of years ago at Trinity College in Dublin. It was an early German source. And great stuff.
Yeah, and we could have gone on for another 11 years. We could have gone on for just keep searching and finding. But one of the things I like about our companion is that we tell you where we found something, and we're not ashamed to say when we got so far and hit a dead end, or we tried this path, that path, they didn't turn anything up. And now I'm really excited that the book is out to see what other scholars, or even just people who really love hymns, what they can find. It's exciting to see what turns up.
We could have gone on for another 11 years. Should we?
Well, no.
Want to produce a second edition of this? Or? I mean, it kills me that 2 weeks after we sent this to the press, I discovered that the earliest source of stanza 3 of the Czech-Slovak hymn, Čas radostivé zelosti, was not published in 1696, but in fact was published in 1674. And unfortunately, our companion says that stanza was published in 1696. So note, folks, stanza 3 of, what's the English? What do we call it?
Come rejoicing.
No, that's the old version from the Lutheran hymnal.
Yeah.
Oh well, you can look it up.
Right.
It's a Christmas hymn, and it was, the third stanza was not published in 1696, but in the previous edition of the same book, 1674. So there you go. Okay.
Right. There you go, folks. We put this little nugget hiding down at the end of this presentation. So if you stayed with us this long, you really got a treat.
Is
Okay,
this
John,
the end?
I think we should wrap it up.
Because I have, okay, I have, all right. I have one more question that came in.
Okay.
Do we have time? Or
yeah.
are we out of time?
No, we can do one more.
Okay. What advice would you give to someone else who's starting a project like this?
Start sooner?
Well, my thought was get out while the getting is good. Oh man. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah. Okay, it's kind of an abstract answer. Yeah, we took a lot of time. I believe that the time was worth it. In another forum, we were kind of talking about this, and I made a joke like, we're not ready for our synod, our publisher isn't ready for our next hymnal yet, or our next hymnal supplement, but we're already working on the companion to that. I guess my advice is maybe a little more philosophical. And it goes back to how it's really easy to search and find all of these things online. I think there's a little bit of a difference just between searching and researching. Knowing what you're looking for, knowing what you have. So the first part of my answer is to develop that discernment about what you're looking at, what you're seeing, and how important it is. But the other half of my answer is have fun with it, because there is a lot of funny stuff out there, and in the biographies, every one of these biographies start the same way. Someone was born, and most of them end the same way, or will end the same way. But these were real people with real lives, and it's often fascinating and interesting and funny, as well as edifying. So that's my two-part answer. Be discerning, but have fun.
I've got two parts. I've got two answers to that too.
Okay.
One, I think, is find some way to organize all your material and document everything that you learn. We used a custom designed database for that. And the second is make lots of friends.
Definitely.
Because there is so much in producing a hymnal companion. Nobody can know it all. You can't be an expert in everything, but there are experts out there. And our attitude was, if we didn't have the answer to a question, we just hadn't found the right person yet. And so one year I took several pages of typewritten questions to a hymn society meeting and just passed it out to everybody and said, if you know the answers to any of these questions or know anyone who might know the answers to these questions, let me know. And so I think the most fun aspect of this project for me was just getting to know so many other hymn scholars from all over the world. And, going out when I'm going to a meeting in Germany, going out and have a beer or something with them, wonderful things. And we got to talking. So that was fun. Okay. All right. Are we done?
I think that's it.
All right. I don't know how to end these things. So tell you what, why don't you just pull the switch? I'll say goodbye. Bye, everybody. It's been fun. Give us a call or write us a note if you have any more questions. And take care. Have a good summer. Bye.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.